Man, it's good to see you again. I've been so blessed by our friendship. And for those of you who are kind of jumping into this conversation, if you're coming from the Sager side or from outside of Anthem's world, my name is Ryan Gorman. I'm the head of school at Anthem Classical Academy. And Kyle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Kyle Rapinchuk, head of school at Sager Classical Academy, just down the road from Anthem in Siloam Springs. So Ryan and I, about 40 minutes apart, and gotten to be good friends over the last few years. So
Yeah,
thanks for having me, Ryan.
absolutely. Excited about this. These are conversations we've had offline and really just wanted to kind of put those together for the sake of both of our schools. Our primary audience here would be families that are within our school that either have not yet taken on um, or interacted much with Learns, or maybe families that are examining our schools that are now looking because of Learns, or maybe just inevitably. And then anyone else who is in Arkansas that's considering or is in school leadership, just as maybe support conversation. Maybe if we say something wrong in the way that we're thinking about it, we'd love to have a dialogue about this as schools are trying to figure out what hopefully is a tremendous blessing to the families and to the schools that we serve. So let me kind of just jump in. I'll paint the picture, and then Kyle, I'll just kind of kick it out to you first. The idea of Learns is called EFAs. A lot of people call them vouchers. Arkansas has a unique, but not unique across the country, but they kind of all get lumped into one idea. So hopefully we get a chance to pierce through some of that today. But Anthem, we are a 4-year-old school, and we started taking Learns last year. Kyle, you guys are in year 6 as a school and are first taking on Learns this coming year. I know you're kind of new to that position and that spot out there, but can you kind of talk me through the at least thought process of what was the reason for waiting? What was the thought behind that? And we might see where these questions kind of unpack as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say there were kind of two different aspects to our decision as a school. One of those was kind of being in between head of schools, in the midst of a head of school search. I think the board looked at that and said, we don't really want to make a big decision like this
Sure.
while we're in this interim. We want to make sure that kind of whoever we hire and bring in has time to be communicated with that, understand what's going on, some of those kinds of things. Was certainly part of the factor. Another is kind of our unique structure, having begun 6 years ago as a kind of what we're calling a parent partnership model,
Sure.
and kind of a hybrid on some of the collaborative models out there, where we have 8 to 12:30 Monday through Friday for our
Okay.
younger
Right.
students. Just added our upper school 3 years ago, or we're in year 3 of our upper school. And so there was kind of this idea of, hey, we're going to register as homeschool. We're going to work through what this is going to kind of grow into.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of question in terms of, are we ready to kind of move on and say, hey, we want to pursue accreditation, or we want to pursue kind of a private school status? Some of those kinds of questions were on the horizon. And so there was a little bit of a pause there to say, let's just make sure that we identify who we are as a school first
Yeah.
and get leadership in place, and then the next conversation would be the Learns Act and the EFAs. And so really grateful for the way the board handled that on our end, to kind of put us in a spot to say, let's define who we are as a school and then define where we're going. Then ask, does Learns fit into that? And for us, we think it does moving forward starting next year, which is why we're going to be pursuing it for the 25-26
Yeah.
school year.
Man, that's
Yeah.
great. That's great. And bravo. And I know members of your board, and I've said this to them, and obviously we've had this conversation, but bravo to you guys to not let that be to be wins that toss you in a season that could be unanchored. And as you shift from leadership, those things then become you're no longer in safe harbor, I guess, if that's that, so to speak. You can be out kind of on open water and are more contingent to the wind that might blow in a direction you didn't anticipate, and you kind of
Yeah.
lose that bearing. So bravo, well done. I think that's good. We've been really blessed by it from the start. Interestingly enough, we have some pretty politically active families who, and I don't mean this as a don't jump down the politics route, but we had a student who was actually just behind Governor Sanders when she signed it. back when she originally signed that bill. So we had some connections back down to her office and some ways that was put together. And so there was not to say there was a pressure, but there was definitely a momentum that was building behind it. We kind of knew it was coming, and we're really excited about what that could be. Now, just for education purposes, we're a different structure. We're the full 5-day kind of traditional model, 8 to 3:30, 8 to 3:15. And so as we were walking through that was one where a lot of families come to us and go, we want to partner well with you, but this is a full-time commitment for us. And so that required a cost level that admittedly probably opted some families out before they could even engage with that conversation. So that's really where that funding idea came to bear, was how students would be able to be blessed by the sacrifices that their parents were already making, or give access to families that were serving our community, either through civic service or through military service or through pastoral shepherding service. And those were places that we already were trying to emphasize. We already had a financial aid program that we used. And we asked those questions. Are you involved in ministry or paraministry, FCA, campus ministries, especially with our proximity to the University of Arkansas? But are you also involved in police? Are you former military? Are you a veteran? Just places where we recognize that in our tradition that we would see someone that engaged and led civically. We want to see how we could honor that role. And so we were already asking, are you in those spaces? Are you serving? Is that a career path or a formal one? And can we help that? And at least acknowledge that within our internal financial assistance program. And then when the Learns EFAs were starting to come out, those were categories that they also wanted to start accelerating into. And so active duty military is one that was eligible 2 years ago. Veterans are eligible this year. First responders are eligible this year. So as it's rolling out towards everybody, those were specific demographic targets that really aligned with some families that were in our community that we already were interacting with and working with, that we thought was a great way to honor that, but questions that we were already asking as we jumped in. So that kind of, I guess that's one explanation of how we got there, jumped in with both feet as to that. But like I said, there's a lot going on with you guys in the last couple of years that you've come in and helped keep things so steady. But if that was going on behind the scenes, something you inherited, it's a different monster. What do you see maybe as the shift? Well, let me back up. Your current families, right? So what are the concerns that they had, or was it just all rose-colored glasses and everybody thought this was going to be great?
Yeah, there were certainly some mixed feelings. And as you mentioned, some of the people that you were asking about, caring about, kind of seeking to identify within your community was the same thing for us. We have some first responder families. We
Yeah,
have active duty or veteran from the military, and even students with some medical needs
sure.
that
Yeah, I
added
forgot
this
that group.
year. Yeah, and so we've had some families that pursued that funding because they were eligible for it, but had to register as homeschool because that's kind of where we are currently.
Sure.
And the challenge for that, of course, is they can't utilize it for tuition, but they can utilize it for some of the vendors and some of the supplies that they may need or curriculum. And so there were a lot of questions because we did have some families who were able to accept that money, but weren't sure exactly, well, why can't we use it on tuition? And
Yeah.
so we said, well, here's where we are. Here's why we're here. Kind of some of what I just explained. We are looking into it. And so there are a lot of conversations happening kind of right out of the gate when I started June 1st of this year. Hey, now that you're here, is this something that we're going to be doing? And it's like, well, the board and I were talking about it. We're making those decisions. We really wanted to make sure that we did our due diligence on all of those kinds of things,
Yeah.
which I know you guys did as well. But looking into what would it look like for us if we rolled out in year 3 of Learns, which is next year,
Yep.
where that opens up to K-12. What's that going to look like for our school? We want to make the best decision on that. And so, as you mentioned, kind of that political connection, we have a parent in our family, school family in our community, who's a state senator. And so he
Yeah.
started doing some of that research for us and asking questions. And so we're reading online, watching the webinars, talking to this parent who's in the state senate, and kind of getting the answers that we're trying to figure out. We want to know, are they going to require certain kind of curriculum things?
Yep.
Are they going to make us teach things that we don't want to teach? Are they going to restrict our Christian faith in any way? What is this going to mean in terms of how we wanted to pursue? We had decided as a board prior to deciding on Learns that we wanted to pursue accreditation through the Society for Classical Learning,
Yep.
saying, hey, this aligns with our values, our mission. This is going to actually give us a really helpful indication of kind of where we stand with other classical Christian schools and help us understand how we can grow. That's the accreditation we want to pursue. Is that something that's going to be accepted? And so we were asking those kinds of questions. And over the last year, and especially into the summer, some of those started to become clear. Yes, in fact, Society for Classical Learning is accepted by the
Yep.
state of Arkansas as a recognized accreditor. Great. We're in year 0 of that accreditation, and we just need to be in the process. So we were great for Learns there. And it's like, well, this is wonderful. We wanted to make sure that the curriculum, as I said, wasn't going to be an issue. And we kept getting answers back. Yeah, they're not going to require this. The only thing that's required is the standardized test. Oh, goodness. Well, we offer the CLT 3rd through 12th grade. Turns out the classic learning test is also accepted by the state of Arkansas. It's like, oh, this is great. So the only thing we need to find is a K through 2 standardized test. Awesome. And so I know that my lower school dean and your director of curriculum have been working together to talk through what's that going to look like and
Yeah.
finding some answers for that. And so it's been really exciting in the process because parents did have those questions. Hey, are we going to have to take some weird standardized test that's going to take up our class time?
Yep.
It's going to be against our values? And it's like, actually, no, we don't have to do that. Well, what about our curriculum? They're not going to touch it. Well, is it a problem that we're Christian? It's not a problem that we're Christian. And so time and again, the questions that parents were asking were the same things that we were getting answers back, that we were like, okay, this is in accordance with our values. They're not going to restrict these things. It was really exciting to kind of be able to answer those questions for parents along the way. And then we actually had made the decision to roll out a couple of different things at once on our board vision night in October. And so
Yeah.
we saved kind of some of our communications for parents about what we were actually going to do with Learns for next year for that meeting, to kind of communicate all at once. Here's why we're doing what we're doing. Here's the way conversations happened. And we decided to pursue this for this reason and pursue this for this reason. And a big value for us as a school is accessibility. We want to be a school for this community. And so there are certainly schools that can be in communities that have perhaps more wealth or more opportunities, many more schools that you could go to. And we were in a spot where it was really an option to say, hey, if this is the classical Christian school that's available within this area, we want to make it accessible to these families and
Yeah.
not restrict it just to the wealthy. And so that was a huge part for us in keeping tuition costs lower, as well as figuring out what options are out there for us to provide that accessibility. And Learns really met that for our families. And so it's something we're excited to pursue.
Yeah, that's great. And you touched on so many things that I know like I said, we talk about, but the opportunity, I'll kind of start with the last thing you said and work backwards. That accessibility piece is so critical. I'd be curious on what, Siloam is. I haven't done that research quite the same. But we're in Fayetteville, which, has the University of Arkansas in it, as well as just a big metro area kind of around it. It depends on who you ask. Are we considered in the same metro or not? It's kind of one of those fun debates, but I came from that world back before Anthem began, as term to what that was costing the public school system around us, to do. And honestly, if a family had to look at what that would be to pay for, but they're funded from multiple sources. And so that's one of the things that trying to do a lot of parent education as to what tuition actually is and what it costs to educate a student. A lot of people know the idea that teachers aren't paid well, and they're not they get all this vacation, but they're doing such critical work, and they're discipling our kids. And so they're partnering well with parents, and especially in your model where it is that parent partnership is up front. I mean, we try to communicate that too, but we want to hire men and women who love the Lord and put their faith on display in front of their students. Not that they'll do it perfectly, but that they'll do it in a way that is authentic and inviting. And so it's one for our students to happen, but also two for our parents to see that we're building a community there. But the idea of paying for what that education is still a really new concept, especially in this part of the state.
Yeah.
Um, and the misconception we get is learn should cover everything. And I know, but like I said, I know those numbers. I know what they looked like before. And so when a public school system is paying an average of 11,500, maybe closer to 12 per student for the year, that's the average. That's not the exceptional, right? And on either end of the word exceptional, whatever that might mean, but that idea of accessibility is probably one of the biggest misconceptions I think that we think about within private education, especially Christian education. We want, and that kind of goes back to the demographics that we were looking at, talking about at the beginning. Obviously, we don't want to just appeal to firefighters and emergency responders and or pastors, but there's a civic servant element to that. And it's not just I want to be careful with my generalized cliche words, but it's not just the wealthy. Those are not the ones who are walking in the door.
Yeah.
It's the families who otherwise could not, but want something different and want something that's markedly different than the school down the street from wherever they happen to live. You highlighted all the places where we were wrestling with that in real time. As we were implementing early, we started having those same questions. We were doing the same thing. We tried to have it all laid out. We read the 144 pages. I can't tell you how many times to try to see if there was something we were missing. We had some board members doing research into it. The mentioned political members of our community were asking questions, and that accessibility was a big piece for us. We didn't just want it to be available for the next thing, but I think that the accreditation piece, and making sure that those things were lined up, making sure the testing lined up with who we were, that there was never a point along this process that was going to say, you can have this but the things that they're asking of us are good standard practices. So things like accreditation, things like norms reference testing, like the CLT, we'll both take it. It's a great assessment. Those make common sense. We're not going to just open a school and money launder it through kids and dig pockets. The ideas are truly, and I've heard the leadership at the Department of Ed say this, and I heard others say this in those political conversations, of the belief behind this is that parents ultimately will know the best decision to make for their children.
Right.
And they get a chance then to direct these funds to where they see it needed best. Most of the time that does come to tuition, but you've already started to encounter families that were eligible for it, accepted the funding, and used it for other services that their students needed. We see it on the same way, the other side too, where those parents then get to opt where they send that money to. It's not just that we've hitched our bank account to the State Department and they're just funneling us cash. There are parents who are choosing, this is the education we want. And the belief is truly to more of free market, and say, if a parent doesn't think that you're able to hold up your end of the bargain, they're going to leave, and then you will not have the funding, which is what we want. That's the essence of school choice. And so as I interact with schools across the country, there's some other ways that looks and how they've structured those programs. In all honesty, I've been very pleased with the way that Arkansas set it up, because there is this pervasive thought that says, if you don't have the school that the parents want, they won't come and you won't get the funds. But it is a parent-directed fund. It is not a state-funded school. It's a completely different way of thinking about it. Some people would argue that's semantics, but I think that directional flow of philosophy, thought, and then therefore money matters. because it does give that direction for parents.
Yeah, and we're completely in the same place as you, and those were the questions we were asking to ensure that, hey, the way that this is set up, is this a way where there are checks and balances to
Yeah.
ensure that there are
Yep.
other eyes on this? Because there are people out there that don't want what they see as public funds going to Christian institutions. And so we want there to be accountability. We want there to be transparency to
Yep.
say, hey, they're looking into this, that they are aware of what we're doing. We have been accredited. We are in the process of demonstrating year after year through taking standardized tests that our students are growing in knowledge. Of course, for us, we care about wisdom and Christian virtue as well, but
Yep.
they're growing in knowledge fantastically, and that's being measured. And so we want that transparency. We're not worried about that. We just like that it's not something that's completely antithetical to our day to day, where a student just feels completely disoriented by the day to day learning and then the standardized test. And
Right.
so
Right.
it was never a question of a standardized test being a bad thing for us. It was, is it the kind of thing that flows out of what we're already doing? And that's why we were extra pleased that something like the CLT and the accreditations were not going to force us into, whether it's just extra practices or things that we didn't agree with. And so that's been really exciting. And I'll hop back on something you mentioned too with the cost of educating the public school kids. You're right that those numbers, sometimes we're just not aware of what it costs to educate a student.
Yep.
And one of the challenges that I hear from a lot of parents in our community is, even in a smaller community like Siloam Springs, we still have anywhere from 25 to 30 kids in our public schools in a particular classroom.
Yep.
And and parents are really wishing those numbers were closer to 12 to 18 or something like that, as opposed to 25 to 30. And that 25 to 30 is what it is to keep that cost, as you said, kind of in the 10 to 12,000 range. And so when I know Anthem has this same goal to not only make it accessible to our families, but to make it where their students are known and
Yes.
cared for. And so we don't want 25 to 30 kids in a class. And so we're kind of like doubly in the challenge there, as far as, let's make this accessible, but we also don't want to kind of fill classrooms to such an extent that they kind of harm their learning. That makes it really difficult to fund. And so part of what we communicated to our families was, hey, the reason we've been able to keep tuition really, really low where it is because of like the insane generosity of our board and some
Yeah.
people in the community. We were highly, highly dependent upon, direct public support and gifts of board members and people in the community. And so we helped kind of educate the parent community on things like hard income coverage and
Yeah.
teacher salaries, and to say, hey, the reason it's worked this way is because of massive gifts and low teacher pay. If we want to be stable, we need to move closer to 100% hard income coverage. Um, and this is what it's going to take for us. Now, we recognize that tuition level may be hard for some families. Learns is something that's going to help make this more accessible. And that was really well received within our community, to understand, okay, we understand why some of these things are changing, and we understand why this is a means of providing some help for families to make the choice. In our case, that so many families were already making, not
Mm.
just the
Right.
families we hope will join us, but this is for the families that had already made the sacrifice to figure out how to scrape by, two, three, four, some families, five kids in our school. How are we going to pay that tuition? And so this provides kind of some financial freedom from them to be able to invest in their churches, invest in other
Yeah.
aspects of the community, and honestly to kind of build towards their children's later education even. And so they're really excited about that. But kind of like we talked about before, they needed to be educated on that. They needed
Sure.
to understand, what are we getting, what is changing, and why. And these are the things I'm concerned about.
Yep.
Things like curriculum and tests, and that we mentioned. And it's been really a helpful process to be able to walk them through that. And families, as they are understanding all of those components, are saying, okay, yes, I like that. And so, as you mentioned, the way Arkansas is handling the school choice and the educational freedom accounts really does put it in the hands of the parents, which is
Right.
what we want. We
Yes.
don't want it in the hands of the school, to just kind of funnel money from the state to the school. We want it to be parents saying, "I'm opting into this. I'm choosing this school because it's best for my child," and that's been really exciting for our community as they've seen that kind of information being relayed to them.
Yeah.
So,
No,
well, as
that's
you're doing that in real time, as you're, already accepting it, we've been able to kind of offer that education as we're about to enter into that next year.
sure. And that's, I think, one of the unique things for us, even kind of going back, just telling our story a little bit more, being in year 4, we started as K5. And so K8, so a large portion of our Learn's accepted students were, or let me rephrase, Learned eligible students that first year were the same ones across the state for percentage wise of us. Because
Yeah.
our growth entry point is kindergarten and first grade. That's our
Hmm.
entry point in our funnel in. And so we have a lot of families who were looking at it that way. And so there's a lot of things that you just kind of said that I'm like, man, we'll just see how this goes. And we could probably talk for hours. I know we already have, but it's fun to do it this way.
We'll spare our viewers
Whoever
of
the audience is at this point, but um, we made it a point to do that early and say, hey, we are planning to accept it, but some things that you need to know. It's new. Anything that's new has we want to see stability in it. But it's a blessing to you so long as it's available. And what available means is kind of two-hand. It's or two-sided in both ends of the handshake. Oh man, I got a time limit, so I'm watching my time here. I guess I got a 10-minute notice. I do. Okay. So there we go. We do get to keep it short.
Yeah.
But families that are looking at it from that entry point, we had families tell us going, you're the only ones that tell us it might not be available forever.
Yeah.
And just saying it's a blessing while it's here. But anything new needs its stability. But right now, everything looks great. We're very pleased with the way the state's openly handed that said that goes, hey, we're going to hold you accountable to do what school is and do it well. But
Yeah.
ultimately, parents would be the ones that are going to hold you accountable to if you're doing what you say you're going to do, and then they'll leave.
That's right.
But if that ever were to change, and we tell families this, if this ever were to change, if they suddenly said you have this teacher training requirement, or you have to take this specific test, or you have to use this specific curriculum, that starts to have strings that we don't want to be beholden to. And
Yep.
that's where we have to let that go. And so there's that other side of that handshake of, yes, we want it to be stable, but it might fall apart, but we don't know. But internally, we also going to hold the right to say, we want to be a school that does these things to our Christian value, to our classical methodologies in pedagogy and the way that we teach our curriculum. Those are going to be true to us, whether we have this available to us or not. So it might be us deciding one day to not take this. And so that's another education piece that we've tried to communicate to families. And it's easy for them to say right now, yes, but we don't know where that'll kind of land and end up. The other piece you mentioned, just kind of in a thought that kind of jogged a memory, that 25 to 30 student mark in terms of the number of students in a class. It's not foreign for them to get it to 32 to 34 up until their October 1 reporting. And then they make the adjustments and then they move things back, and those things flex and change. And so there'll be a bunch of people who say, oh no, we can do it. We never go more than 30. And I can tell you that they work that out. But the interesting thing is that the whole misconception we hear really in a pretty vocal anti-private school community that we have is that we're just going to rob the public schools blind. We're going to take all the money out of it. Well, the money follows the student. And so as of October, the end of October, for the most part, the public school system knows their budget for next year because of the number of students that are in the building. And so there is now this element of, well, they've never had to think about what the parent's going to make a choice for next year, because there was just an assumption that they just had the only product on the market.
Right.
And now there's this expectation that families can go, I'm going to go choose something else. And that's where those the money follows the student, which is what's supposed to do. If we're contributing to a tax base that funds education of the future educated society that we want to live in, Are we contributing to that? And that's the question that we ask ourselves. And we say, yes, we're contributing well to that. That not just public education, but the education of the future public. That those again, those semantics matter, but they work out well. We believe. I just saw Nate Carr's name drop a little bit this morning, but his blog post that he put out there, but I thought it was so well said. The idea that the process by which a community preserves and transmits its physical and intellectual character. And so when you got to a point where school districts and really the idea of public education grew so much that it started to isolate or alienate certain elements of that physical and intellectual character, that's where you start seeing this show up and going, hang on, wait a minute, this should follow my kids. This money should follow where my student needs to go. As we kind of wrap up, I guess we're kind of closing in on a 5-minute mark here. What are some cautions you have kind of going forward? What's the thought around the next 5 years of assuming that it's there? What are the cautions you have?
Yeah, I think you hit on the idea that we fully recognize that in opting in, we may one day have to opt out.
Yeah.
Either because the program ceases to exist or because the program changes and starts to require things that we don't agree with. And so there's definitely that sense in trying to honor our teachers and pay them well, honor our community by offering good programs and doing things to the best that we possibly can do them, but to do that in a way that doesn't overextend ourselves such that if we have to opt out of this funding, all of a sudden we're stuck with
Yeah.
salaries we can't pay and programs we can't offer and just droves of families leaving us because we've made it, inaccessible without
Right.
this money.
Right.
That's definitely a fear that people have had in the community, and we address that with our parent community and just kind of talked through that like, hey, we're working on figuring out how we can make wise decisions as a school to have healthy reserves, to make a roll off possible when that happens. For some of our families that have been scraping by that will have a little bit extra, the encouragement to them is, I even use kind of the analogy of Joseph in
Yeah.
Egypt.
We've used
Idea
it too. That's good.
yeah, you gotta sometimes in the years of plenty set it aside for the years of famine. Maybe what families set aside for a college education, they find they have to pull out early for their students' high school education
Yep.
if this goes away, and that's okay too. The hope is, in if and when that happens, that families understand the value of the education we're offering and
Yep.
recognize that we're willing to work with them and they want to continue working with us because they see the value of the education and they want to pursue that. But it is definitely a caution to not overextend as a school. And so I know we've had those conversations about how do you hire the right people, how do you pay them well,
Yep.
while also making sure you don't overextend your budget to where you have to start cutting people. I think another caution is just, there's always a danger where it looks good now and we accept it and we move forward. If and when we get to that spot where we have to opt out because of some differences, to have the courage to do that, to
Yeah.
say, hey, this is no longer in alignment with our values. And so we really push our mission, to make sure that our board, our teachers, our administrators, our families hear that mission, know what we're all about. And again, it's why families are choosing to be with us in the first place, but it's the hope that they would be in support of that decision if it ever came time to say, hey, we have to opt out because they're now requiring this thing
Yeah.
that we don't agree with. I would hope that they would go, bravo, that's the right decision. We're with you, we're behind you. Let's figure out how we make this work. And so my hope is that there's a longevity for this program,
Yeah.
that we'll see the value of it. My hope, honestly, is that even parents of students who choose to keep them at public schools will recognize that the accountability and transparency that's now there for public schools in a unique way increases the value and benefit and quality of the public education. And so my hope is that this helps all schools get better
Yeah.
because there's a true, I don't like the term so much, but a true marketplace of schools where each family is saying this is best for our student and therefore they pursue that. that
Absolutely.
all of those educational opportunities improve. So that's my hope. But yeah, there's certainly those cautions in there to make sure that we stay true to our mission, even if the money won't follow it anymore.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had those exercises. Those are good. We've tried to make those thoughts of what are those red lines now so that we don't have to make them when we're in the pinch. That we
Yep.
make them, we've already made those decisions of where those red lines are so that then if it ever is crossed, it's not a decision then, it's already made and we
It's
know where
already
the
made.
next is.
Yep.
But I agree. I think that idea of giving parents that option should at least provoke more conversation.
Yes.
Whether students are staying in public school systems, whether they're going to other private schools, whether they're going to homeschool, whether they're going to micro schools, whether they're going to classical Christian schools, wherever they end up, the point would be that the program as its whole and as its really ethos should be one that equips them to ask better questions and be more involved in what their kids are learning and what that
Yes.
education looks like and matches at their kitchen table.
Yeah.
That's really what we're about.
Yep.
And so we have sent students to other private schools. We've sent students to other, like we've swapped students between our schools.
Yes.
And it's one because we want them to find the best fit for where they live, for where they're at, for what their
Yes.
home needs and what their student needs. And that's the beautiful thing. And we really hope that the program advances that. I'm less than a minute, so I'm going to wrap us up. Kyle, it was great to talk to you. Hopefully this is a blessing to your
You're right.
families as well as mine. But blessings on your school and your endeavors. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Same for you.
All right. Take care.